Richard Sanders. We last met in this room to discuss your truly powerful agenda-setting film about the awful events of October the 7th, which while not dismissing or downplaying the atrocities committed by Hamas, but also told the other truths about what happened and exposed many of the lies told by the Israelis in the immediate aftermath, which set the agenda, of course, for the atrocities carried out by Israeli army since then in Gaza. You've now produced a companion film, a sequel, and I think what you do in this film is to tell the story of what's happened in the last year in Gaza.
That's right. I mean, essentially, it's an investigation into war crimes, and it's an investigation into war crimes that uses as its evidence, above all, the videos and photographs and social media posts of Israeli soldiers. In a way, the starting point of the film was this realization that you had this astonishing treasure trove, as the international...
As Rodney Dixon, KC.
He says it's a treasure, prosecutors will be licking their lips. Susan Abel-Hawa says it's the first live-stream genocide in history. And to agree, it's right. It's true. I mean, we thought, right, okay, we're going to have to do a lot of OSINT facial recognition work here. But we didn't. I mean, it's all posted under their own names, their rank, their unit, and so on. And the quantity of it is astonishing. I mean, we worked with a particular freelancer, excellent, very thorough researcher. He's compiled for us a database of over 2,500 social media accounts. And we're talking here Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And
created by Israeli soldiers.
All created by Israeli soldiers, many of them of pretty senior ranks, And they just keep putting this stuff up there that certainly reflects very badly on the Israeli military. And our contention is that in many cases it may well show war crimes. The other aspect of the film is obviously we film on the ground in Gaza. Some extraordinary work done for us by people on the ground in Gaza. We also interview journalists, particularly Al Jazeera journalists who've come out of Gaza.
These very brave, heroic figures.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
From the perspective of Western journalists, it's actually humbling. We think we do vaguely risky things every now and then. We never think our children are going to be murdered.
Yumna Al-Sayed's testimony, the Gaza Strip correspondent for...
And of course, Wael Dadu, whose family was murdered. I mean, you and I perhaps have been in situations where we think, oh gosh, this is getting a bit hairy and so on. We never think they're going to murder our children.
Or target us.
Yeah.
Target us. Most of us have seen some of these TikTok accounts normally, but they're all over Instagram as well. Put out there by these Israeli soldiers, in which they're dancing around in women's underwear, they're blowing up buildings, and they're in one case in the film, they're sniping people.
Well, there's
what appear to be civilians. Is this?
The people are unarmed, certainly. There's a sort of ascending order. And I think, first of all, the important thing to say is what you don't see is combat. What they almost never post is combat, which is what you would think you would be posting. I mean, I've seen various people doing a lot of work into how much damage has been done to Hamas, how degraded is Hamas. And what I would say to people who are researching this is look through these thousands of videos. The IDF itself puts out a lot of videos and count the number of bodies with guns next to them. very limited number, very limited number. I mean, I remember, over 20 years ago in Afghanistan when the Taliban were crushed. And in those days, of course, not everyone was filming on their phone. But even so, I remember seeing footage of piles of bodies, as the Northern Alliance moved through Afghanistan, piles of bodies. Nothing like that in... Now, I'm not saying that Hamas hasn't sustained damage and fighters haven't been killed, but one of the things that is remarkably absent from these videos is, not entirely absent, but to a large degree absent, is combat footage and dead Hamas fighters.
Another curiosity about these soldiers, the ones which you can see waving underwear around, blowing up buildings, are they all Israeli soldiers?
Well, a lot of them are dual nationals. It's quite striking how often you'll have some guy posting something, he's clearly British, or he's clearly American, or he's clearly French, or he's clearly South African. A lot of these people are dual nationals. Some of them may not even be Israeli nationals at all. I don't know. I mean, this isn't something we've done the empirical work on, but it certainly, it's something that strikes you immediately about these videos, how many of them are clearly not sort of native Israelis.
So it's like an international brigade almost,
yes, in a way.
In fighting with the Israeli army.
Yeah. And I think perhaps that's how some of these guys see it.
They see it as some form of war of civilizations, do you think? I mean, do you get any sense of that from the...
Yes, and there are people for whom their Jewish identity is very important and for whom it is tied up integrally with Israel. I mean, they are great, they're passionate Israeli nationalists, passionate Israeli patriots, however you want to characterize it.
And the attitudes coming out towards the Palestinians, of course, you can see this, are quite grotesque in some cases, because they completely dehumanize them, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the underwear thing, which you've touched on, which is bizarre, and it just recurs again and again. I suppose they think they're exposing some sort of hypocrisy. I suppose that's the sort of weird thing that's going on in their head. But you see it again and again and again, rifling through women's underwear drawers, putting on women's underwear, taking humiliating photos, holding up women's underwear and so on, and it is deeply dehumanizing. It's repellent to watch.
So what the film does, I watched it last night. It presents the way the Israeli soldiers see the world as presented by them onto social media accounts, and then you have this very remarkable footage from inside Gaza, and so in a way you get both worldview.
It's a juxtaposition.
The juxtaposition is a nice way of putting it, and there are quite a large numbers of different categories of potential war crimes. Let's go through them more or less at random, one by one. So, for instance, then the treatment. What do we learn about the treatment of detainees?
Well, I tell you what. Should we go in a sort of an ascending order?
Yes.
Because what one sees, first of all, is just deeply unpleasant behaviour, this fooling around with women's underwear. There's a whole category of things, interminable jokes. They endlessly do this joke where you knock on a door, no answer, knock on the door, and then the camera pulls back and the house behind it is destroyed. Okay, and which they seem to find incredibly funny, pretending to be estate agents and showing you around destroyed properties and so on. So lots of remarkably unfunny, supposedly funny videos. So that's, these things aren't war crimes, but they are it's very odd for soldiers on duty to be posting online. I mean, we interviewed British Army officers who said, there's no way I'd get back to base at night and discover my men loading up footage onto Facebook. You put a stop to it immediately. And part of it is it compromises security. There's so many reasons for not doing it. Anyway, you then have lots of footage of people just destroying people's houses, just smashing up their houses.
Inside the houses? Inside
the house, just with hammers and just smashing up people's houses.
And wrecking their sort of possessions too.
Yeah, exactly. Now that, potentially is certainly something that as Rodney Dixon, our expert, says, it's something the ICC might look at. It's wanton destruction. There's no, if somebody's standing in someone's kitchen just smashing all the plates, I mean, I'm no expert, but I really can't see the military logic of that. Then, as you sort of ascend the scale, you then have wanton destruction in terms of the blowing up of buildings. Now, this just recurs again and again and again in these videos. These enormous explosions. We focus particularly on the 8219 Combat Engineering Battalion, which did a lot of them, but lots of other units do as well. Now, the point about these explosions is they're not standing there and firing a tank shell or firing mortars or whatever at it. They've gone into the building and very carefully rigged it up, which obviously means there's no one in the building. You know?
Major General Charlie Herbert, retired, made this point, didn't he, with his practiced eye.
Yeah.
He served in Afghanistan, Iraq.
And again, it's common sense as well. If you can stand that, you can spend half a day rigging up a building with explosives. There's no one in the building. Also, actually, if you are, if you know about these things, you look at what they're doing. They're using anti-tank mines. There's massive overkill. You know, if you simply wanted to bring the building down, you don't need to use explosives that big. They're like kids playing. You know, it's like a firework display. And you can see them. They just go for the bigger and the bigger explosion. You know, that's one of them actually says in the film. We are addicted to explosions. We have become addicted to explosions, and that is potentially the crime of wanton destruction. We focus in particular on the town or the village of, it's a town really, of Khyber, east of Khan Yunis, very close to the fence, which is entirely destroyed. They just totally obliterate the town. It is simply a pile of rubble at the end of it. And the soldiers in their posts make very clear that the reason for this is revenge.
Yeah.
You have revenge rhetoric again and again and again. I mean, they also appear to be trying to build an extended buffer zone along the fence, and that would be part of the logic as well. But again, you can't do that under international law. You can't just create buffer zones like that. And so that, in a way, is the potential crime that you see again and again and again, wanton destruction. And then treatment of detainees. Extraordinary, horrific treatment of detainees, stripped naked, humiliated, being dragged around, and again, you just can't do that under international law.
Do you use drone footage at all in the film?
Sometimes these videos are quite glossily and professionally produced, and they put music on them, and sometimes, yes, they have drone shots. Sometimes they have drone shots. Now, there's a second category of drone shot which has not been put online by the Israelis, but which Al Jazeera Arabic have got hold of. They've somehow got hold of drone footage that the Israelis have taken, and we make use of some of that. There is another category of video we didn't talk about, which is videos put online by Israeli civilians. And I think, in the West we have this tendency to talk about this terribly complex dispute and you have to be nuanced and so on. Listen to Israeli soldiers in their own videos, listen to Israeli politicians when they're speaking in Hebrew, and listen to what Israeli civilians put online. And when people tell you who they are, believe them, okay? You listen to Israelis and there's nothing complicated or nuanced. This is, when it's not overtly genocidal, it's certainly talking about ethnic cleansing and so on, and it certainly manifests a pervasive and deep and extreme racism towards racism and contempt towards the Palestinian people, and that you capture in the videos that are put online by Israeli civilians, which also feature in the film.
There's one particular story which had me. I will have people absolutely blow their. It's quite extraordinary, concerning the rape of a detainee by a dog. Can you explain?
Yes, so there's two things about the treatment of detainees. One is the treatment of detainees initially when they are taken. And this is where you see them all stripped naked and what have you, and lined up and so on. And we'll come on to this, the use of human shields. That's when they get used as human shields as well. There is then the treatment of Palestinians in detention centres within Israel. Now, we actually don't spend that long on this in the film because it's now, if you're paying attention at all, it's quite clear that torture and rape are systematic within those detention centres. Now, we have one particular interviewee who tells a story of witnessing the use of a dog to rape a man. And this is something health officials in Gaza have spoken about as well. Yes, it's horrific. It's horrific. And it's interesting with sexual violence, of course. This is very sort of loaded and emotive. And of course, with October the 7th, there were all these allegations of sexual violence, which we, in our film, took pains to say there really wasn't, there wasn't convincing evidence that it had happened on October the 7th. Now, with Israeli troops in Gaza, there's the issue of sexual violence against women. Now, we don't go into this in the film. This is clearly inappropriate touching and humiliation and so on goes on. What you clearly see is that, and then you can't help but feel that this isn't connected to the perception of how Palestinians behaved on October the 7th. You see the repeated rape of Palestinian men in detention centres, and there are UN reports about this. It's clearly it's widespread and systematic. You suspect it is perceived as revenge for October the 7th. The Israelis, under pressure from the international community, have actually started arresting some of the soldiers who at detainees detention centre, and yes, and we have this astonishing, appalling account from one interviewee who actually witnessed a dog being used to rape a man.
And of course, you do show the footage of the reaction in Israel after the arrest by the authorities in this detention centre.
They arrest 9 men at detainees detention centre, which provokes a furious reaction within Israel. I think it'd be very important. The base is stormed by right-wing demonstrators and so on, and the most extraordinary and very revealing reaction. Very important to keep an eye on those cases. I think 4 of the men have now been released. I think the other cases are ongoing, but let's see if those cases actually go anywhere. And there was a strong sense, anyway, that at the time Israel was coming under pressure from the International Criminal Court, the ICJ, and so on. And there was a sense that they needed to do something.
Yes, but then the subsequent reaction which you show, and it's then the very flippant discussions of it on national TV in Israel.
Yes, I think somebody in the Knesset actually basically said it's fair enough to Nukhba terrorists, as he was calling them.
So what's the next?
Well, murder is the ultimate one, and we have a video where, and again, it just speaks to the astonishing sense of impunity. It's a sort of commemorative video put online by members of the 202nd Paratroopers Battalion, and it contains 3 instances where men who are clearly unarmed are shot by snipers. And again, we've had military people or human rights people look at this footage, and it maybe there's a military justification, but if you're shooting unarmed people, the onus is on you to explain why you're shooting them, and to just put it in a video up on YouTube is bizarre.
So the video is actually uploaded by the Israeli army?
No, it's uploaded by individuals.
No, sorry, I meant by individuals.
By individuals. Yeah. But the Israeli army doesn't seem to have a problem with this.
Yeah. And from memory, you just see individuals walking down a street, don't you?
Yeah, so they're clearly unarmed. There's 2 of them are just the 2 men walking along, and one of them is shot. One of them is there's a dead body on the floor, an unarmed man on the floor, and someone's come out and they're bending over it, and that person is shot in the head.
It's very, as Charlie Herbert, the British retired Major General, said that, it looks very hard to explain. It's not quite impossible. Some may be that there is a context which. Did you present that to the Israeli authorities?
We are. Yes, I mean, we're awaiting the right to replies.
I see.
I don't. We have presented all these accusations. We haven't heard anything back from the Israelis yet. They tend to ignore us. The IDF tends to simply ignore Al Jazeera.
Yes, but it's a major question. I mean, because what you're seeing is terribly shocking. Seeing unarmed people shot dead in cold blood. And it's the sort of thing you'd expect if it did happen. I think it does happen in many armies. War is a horrible thing, and although that didn't feel like a warlike situation, it feels like more like there wasn't any evidence of them being shot at, was it? I mean,
no, and these men were unarmed. They're clearly unarmed, and if you're going to shoot unarmed men, you have to have a very good reason for doing it.
let's now look at I found I mean, everything was fascinating in your very somber film, which I think will be a matter of great historical significance as time goes on, as people try to understand what's been happening over the last 12 months. Let's have a look at your section on human shields, where, of course, it's long been an Israeli claim that the Palestinians do that, or Hamas does it, and you deconstruct that analysis quite.
Yes, I think in a way it's one of the most extraordinary passages in the film, because, to be honest, all of the information there, any professional news organisation could have asked a 22-year-old researcher, look into this, and they'd have come up with that. It's not difficult, it's not complicated, it's all in the public domain. And it is quite astonishing the way in the West, every time the scale of civilian casualties and continuing Western assistance to the Israelis is raised, they will talk about human shields. But Hamas is using the civilian population as human shields. This is why the civilian casualties are so high. I mean, I saw Starmer does it, Blinken does it, Biden does it, Kamala Harris does it. I saw David Lammy on the BBC a while back being interviewed by Victoria Derbyshire, and he was he was struggling to get his words out, and she actually finished the sentence for him and said, human shields, as a justification. Hamas are using the population.
So it's not just the politicians who use this language, it's filled in for them by a journalist.
And a journalist as good as Victoria Derbyshire, who is as good as it gets at the BBC. And it is just bewildering, because you just have to do very basic journalism. Okay, because the Israelis have attacked the Gaza Strip for 2009, 2014, and in the wake of those attacks there have been very detailed reports done by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, by the UN, by B'Tselem, and so on. Now, if you go back to those conflicts, there'll be one or two incidents where perhaps they fired rockets from next to an apartment building and hadn't warned the people inside. You have to really dig around for instances like that. But using human shields in the sense of forcing people to be in front of you and not letting them get away, there's simply no evidence for it at all. And also, anyone who knows the way Hamas operates, it is ultimately a popular movement. They would very quickly, and the fighters, I think people's attitude to Hamas in the Gaza Strip is very complicated now. But the fighters, people always support the fighters, And the idea that they would be putting people who are effectively their own sisters and aunts and what have you in front, it just doesn't really wash, and there is no evidence. Now again,
presumably, I think the Israelis would say, look, it's a resistance movement, a terrorist movement, they would say, fighting in a very built-up area. They are effectively making this population.
Yes, but where are they meant to fight? I mean, that's where they're being attacked. And as Bill Van Esveld says in our film, very often, yes, that is the beginning and the end of the accusation, that they are fighting in a very crowded place where there are also civilians. Now, again, the Qassam brigades have put up over 300 combat videos. They also post online, and there it's very controlled. They're edited videos that they're putting out for a propaganda purpose. It's how you would expect a military organisation to behave. And of course, they're only putting up their successes. They don't put up their failures. But certainly, I would defy you to go through those 300 videos and point to a civilian. There's never any civilians. They're always carrying out their attacks in a desolated, empty environment. I mean, I've watched lots of those videos. I've never seen a civilian in any of those videos. They now, when they're attacked, they will defend from areas, yes, where there may be civilians around, but certainly their own attacks are launched in places that are empty. So it really is quite extraordinary. It is one of those absolutely bewildering things that this is simply never challenged. The Israelis and Western politicians will always simply say, but the problem is Hamas hides behind the civilian population. And there simply isn't any evidence for it. And in fact, conversely,
There's lots of evidence, though, isn't there, going back many years of Israeli...
Of the Israelis using human shields.
Yeah.
And again, this is very well documented by B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, the UN. It's very well documented. And we showed, and there's footage of it. You can see it. You know, there's guys walking along with their gun on someone's shoulder. You know, it's a...
And you also have produced this very shocking evidence of inside the Gaza, in Gaza, of Israel using Palestinians to go ahead and...
Yes, they use them to check empty buildings.
Check empty buildings.
This was Al Jazeera Arabic obtained this footage. There's quite a bit of footage of people being bound and forced to look around empty buildings and so on. Also, in our own interviewees within the Gaza Strip, and we weren't actually particularly looking for people who'd had the experience of being used as human shields, but in fact, repeatedly, when we interviewed people about other things, part of their story was that after being detained, they were used as a human shield. We interviewed 6 people. We talked to 6 people who had all said they'd all been used as human shields.
Let's move on briefly to you have a short section on Israeli use of torture, which is quite well known, of course, in the prisons, but you present some quite important new testimony about that.
Well, there's an Israeli soldier's video, again, where he's speaking in French, and they're getting detainees off the back of a truck, and he says, "Look at this one. This will make you laugh. This will make you laugh. Look at the marks on his back. We tortured him." You know, and again, it's there on. He says it on camera. This will make you laugh. We tortured him.
And that is, as Rodney Dixon, the KC, says in that context, it's very difficult to prove torture often because those who've committed it...
So it's enormously helpful when people put up videos where they say, here's one we tortured earlier, you know.
Yeah, it's completely harrowing, that. Maybe, and then I'm going to come on to one more thing, so I give my... and that you have a section on starvation as a weapon of war.
Yeah, it's very brief, that, really, because I think that's a fairly well-known story. But it's Bill Van Esvelt from Human Rights Watch. He says they've studied strikes on convoys. I think he says 7. There was the very well-known one on April the 1st, where a number of foreign aid workers, including British people, were killed. But he said they've identified 7 cases where this has happened, where aid convoys have been struck like this. And it's probably more now. And the remarkable thing is these aid organizations have done what you conventionally do. What you do is you tell the parties where you're going to be. You give them the coordinates so they know where you're going to be. You deconflict, as they say. And in a number of cases, those precise coordinates were then hit, which is quite extraordinary.
And I think finally we might come on to the issue of UK, British complicity in what is happening at the moment in Gaza.
I mean, here, you know, as we talked about this last time, I would point people to the excellent work done by independent media, filling the shameful gap, really, that is left by conventional British media. This is all work that's been done by Matt Kennard, Declassified UK. And, you know, Matt has worked out that RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus is central to all this. He's seeing huge numbers of, first of all, this isn't in the film, but he's seeing huge numbers of cargo planes flying from RAF Akrotiri into Israel. Now, the British government won't say, well, the British government claims they're carrying diplomats and medical supplies, which doesn't sound very convincing. The strong suspicion is they're carrying American military supplies in. They're using RAF Akrotiri as an entrepot for American military supplies. No, we don't know, they won't tell us. The other thing Matt uncovers, and this we do reference in the film, is these surveillance flights. Dozens and dozens of surveillance
1,000 hours of it.
Yeah, that was up to March.
Yeah.
1,000 hours of surveillance footage, supposedly to facilitate hostage rescue, which is very hard to work out how that works. I mean, apart from anything else, at that time there were only 2 British hostages in the Gaza Strip, and by definition they didn't know where they were. So, you know, what this surveillance footage consists of is hard to know, and the strong suspicion again is that they are providing targeting information to the Israelis. Very important point to make about that, and we just referenced this very briefly in the film. There has been no let-up in these surveillance flights since July the 4th, continuing exactly the same under the current Labour government as it was under the Conservative government.
Yes, Labour, to its credit, has sort of stepped back on some points. It's on the resistance to the ICC warrants, arrest warrants.
Yes, I mean, I think it's done the bare minimum. I mean, it's looked at the legals and covered its. They realise they've got to cover their back legally. I mean, it's the bare minimum. It really is.
But
the Western powers remain. The rhetoric is the same with Kamala Harris. The rhetoric has changed very slightly in America because they've realised how unpopular this is. But in practice, as we said at the end of the film, the Americans and the Germans, very important, the Germans as weapons suppliers to the Israelis, the Americans and the Germans are supplying weaponry as they did before. We are continuing to operate our surveillance flights. So, there's been a bit of a change in the tone of Western politicians. In practice, Western powers remain absolutely complicit in what is happening in Gaza.
One last question. What about the British, our beloved friends in the British media? What points you've produced now two very thorough films, one about October the 7th itself, secondly, we now have your new film. I mean, do you think that the British media is complicit as well by...
Well, what the British media does, and it's interesting, our film is coming out at a time when a number of people are doing their anniversary films for October the 7th. So let's have a look. The BBC, last night as we're speaking, did, I think it was a 90-minute film on the attack on the music festival, okay, which, it was a dreadful event, and I'm told it's a very powerful film. Slightly odd focus when in the intervening period, at least 42,000 people have been killed. And to sort of not mention that at all is a little odd. Now, I understand that there is a panorama forthcoming, Jane Corbin panorama special, an hour long, which I understand will do very much the same as the ITV film a couple of weeks ago, which is, focus on a couple of Israeli families, focus on a couple of Palestinian families. Now, I think at Al Jazeera, we're in a way liberated from what you might call both sidesism and this rather bogus equivalence. And I think there's 2 points to make here. One, a point that is repeatedly made but not really taken on board. There is no equivalence between an occupying power and an occupied people, an all-powerful occupying power backed by the world's only superpower, and a completely prostrate, helpless, occupied people. There is no equivalence between those two. And also in terms of what has actually happened over the last year. Now, our October the 7th film was quite clear that serious human rights crimes were committed on October the 7th. We were clear about that.
By Hamas.
By Hamas, yeah, and others who followed them through the fence.
Yeah.
But, just let's look at the hard statistics. We had all this stuff about babies and beheaded babies and so on. 2 babies died. Two children under 1 died or were killed, let's be clear, on October the 7th. At the end of August, the Gazan Health Ministry released a remarkable list of the documented dead. There's a figure of about 34,000 people, I think. Now, I can't remember, but a number of pages at the beginning
14.
of that. It was 14 pages.
Under the age of 1.
Children under the age of 1. Okay, it was 701 children under the age of 1. Okay, now this doesn't include 7,000 or so undocumented bodies. It doesn't include, very, very roughly 10,000 bodies that are probably still under the rubble. It doesn't include the very large number of people who have died because of lack of access to medicines and healthcare. So we are talking at the very, very least 701 babies set against 2 babies. There's no equivalence here. And if you are, as the BBC and ITV are very careful to do this, you'll have the news that Palestinian suffering, Israeli suffering. But if you're going to present, putting it in very blunt terms, hundreds and hundreds, possibly thousands of babies as equivalent to 2 babies, then you are buying into a racist arithmetic. There is no equivalence between those two things. And I think that's where we're liberated at Al Jazeera, is we're not obliged to engage in this sort of rather bogus both sidesism, and we can speak bluntly and frankly about something that is not an issue, it's not a complex, political dispute, it's a crime. Let's be clear, what has been done in the last year in the Gaza Strip is a crime.
Or a series of crimes.
A whole series of crimes.
Every day.
Whether it's genocide or not, it always seems to me rather irrelevant. The murder of 15,000 children is a crime. There's no justification for the murder of 15,000 children. And we're sort of liberated at Al Jazeera, and that we can talk about, call a spade a spade.
Thank you very much, Richard Sanders. I look forward to seeing the reaction to the film when it comes out. As I remember, it was greeted with blank ignoral, one might say, your first film by the British.
Well, not by you, not by Owen Jones, not by Navarra, it's and not by Double Down News. The
BBC, the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, all these great teachers are
but they need to be careful that they discredit themselves, because in the age of social media, a lot of people do see this stuff and they notice that it's being ignored.
Thank you very much.